But maybe to get us to where we're at now, I'd like to talk about this kind of phenomenon in like the American academic left and maybe the European academic left, which to me has seemed to do almost everything to try to like pull class out of leftist and like socialist politics. I'll just say like, I had a really great professor at a university. I won't name him now. I really appreciated him so much, but I'll never forget. Right, I'm a poor white trash like redneck kid, first from my family to go to college, and I studied Marxism because I thought this was like a tool to like fight for my family and my class and all this kind of stuff. And I remember I took a graduate seminar with him on Marxism, and it starts with Marx and Lenin. And it's interesting. When it gets to Gramsci, it's very fascinating. You add culture into the mix. And then it ended with Chantal Mouffe and Ernesto Laclau's Hegemony and Social Strategy. And I can't express just like the devastation I had when I finished that book, right? Because I'm going into it with, starry-eyed. It's like, I'm going to get these tools to fight for people. And I remember just holding that book at the end of it, closing, be like, "This is it. This is the end of Marxism, right? Like this is
somebody cut you with your
it's
knees.
incredibly disappointing."
No, I mean, the general observation that the whole tendency has been towards undermining class analysis or even materialist analysis is absolutely right. And to my mind, David, where we are right now is we often think of this moment as trying to revive and revitalize the left and try to get things going again. To my mind, we're not trying to revitalize the left. We're having to create one from scratch. Because what the last 40 years did was it preserved a kind of radical culture in certain pockets, but that radicalism is one that is largely retrofitted and fitted to advance people's professional careers in the academy, not a radical. So it's a radicalism that has capitalism taken out, because nobody in the academy gets points for being anti-capitalist. So the kind of identitarianism and culturalism, nihilism that's now passing for the left, it's one that you can't use in any way of revitalizing the left. So we're essentially starting from scratch now. And it's a depressing thing to think about, because you have nothing. There are no unions, there's no parties, there's nothing. But it's just accurate. I don't think, given the devastation, that intellectual devastation that postmodernism, identity politics, this kind of race essentialism, all of these are ideologies of an upwardly mobile professional class, some of it black, some of it white, some of it brown. And they all have really well-tuned class instincts. And that's why they never use the language of class, because they know that it's going to hurt them in their advancement. So that's why I'm very pessimistic about universities being the place where you can revitalize ideas at all, because they really very effectively built a wall around universities, not just of keeping Marxists out. Universities always did that, but they have, in their own culture, they have this kind of radical vocabulary that sucks people in so that they can pose radical while pursuing their careers in a way that makes them crazy if you tell them this isn't radicalism. So to my mind, it's not surprising, and we're going to have to try to build a socialist or radical culture outside the universities, because they're completely taken over.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because I think we're all in agreement that we all found the Bernie Sanders campaigns, particularly 2016, but also 2020 in a lot of ways, to be really inspiring and hopeful in a lot of ways. But here we are in 2023, and I'm not trying to say it wasn't a good thing, but we're sitting here. Bernie Sanders not going to run for president again, so like that whole vehicle's gone.
Yeah.
And what I've seen has just been a real retreat into a lot of people who are like maybe from the older left into old tendencies and habits. I think a lot of people who maybe came to the left during the Bernie Sanders time, I don't know, maybe trying to figure out what exactly to do. But like, I mean, I feel like we're more demobilized than we have been even in like recent memory right now. And I'd be curious, like, because like, I don't know, like, let me, like, the good pitch is this. I remember in 2015, 2016 doing DSA stuff and sometimes being really excited, but also seeing a lot of that kind of like more university left stuff coming into the movement and groups. Something did happen when people had to go out and talk to people and be in public, where
Yeah.
like it wasn't even that anyone won an argument. It was just like eventually like they realized, oh, this is really alienating, or this doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I wonder like how we can continue to refine and grow, versus the left right now, versus what I'm seeing now is like more fragmentation and a lot of people retreating to some of those old tendencies.
Yeah, and that's 100% right, David. Let's be very clear that the Bernie moment is over.
Yeah.
And it lasted, it was not inconsiderable. It lasted about 6 years or so. And I gave this talk to the DSA, I think it was 2018, when I said, look, we've got about 5 or 6 years to try to make something of this. Because once Sanders retreats from the political scene, there's nobody else standing in what's called backstage, right? Uh, this whole squad and all that, they're really, their natural constituency is the university left. They're not gonna. The key to, it's shocking that I have to say this. The key to moving to the left is the white working class. You will not get anywhere if you spend all your time shitting on the white working class, wagging your finger at them, telling them that they're racist, telling them that they're misogynist, telling them they're ripping off the world. The fact of the matter is they are still the largest section of the American working class. And there is only one politician on the left who has the ability to communicate to them in a way that's not patronizing, condescending, or just spiteful. And that was Bernie. Mm-hmm. Nobody else on the left, in the mainstream political left, is able to do that. So now that Bernie's gone, you're kind of on your own. Now, I don't think that we're so demobilized that it's back to where we were in 2010. You're not old enough. You have that was a very different time. A show like this to exist, there is this. The way to think about it is, the wave is receded, but it's left this residue, and some of it is mass media. Some of it is organizing, some of it is new magazines and journals, and some of it is this incipient activist left that sees the dead endism of the identity politics and how much identity politics is really just a kind of elite politics. The difficulty is there's no roadmap as to how to get from here to there, because everyone on the post-Bernie left understands that the key is labor. The key is class organizing. It's just the world today is so different from the world even 50, 60 years ago. We don't know how to get into that class and start doing these everyday organizing works. There are sections of DSA that are doing it. DSA itself will never do it. It's never going to happen that organization becomes a working class organization. What it might do is become a place where you have a kind of a gathering ground for working class organizers who could later break away into a party, but it's not going to do it. What it's done is made a vehicle for people to come together and try to start talking in caucuses and in mini conferences and things like that. So I'm not perhaps quite as pessimistic as you sounded a second ago. I do think that the left is in a better place than it was 10 years ago, because at least it no longer constantly pisses on the working class. I also think that the ruling class has a deep problem, which is that it does not have a solution to the collapse of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism has ideologically collapsed. It is not yet politically challenged, but that ideological collapse shouldn't be underestimated. Everybody knows that the jig is up. The difficulty is the only social forces organized enough to reconstitute themselves right now are capital and the servants of capital. So it could be that 5 years from now, we're even worse off than we are today. It could be. But the situation is fluid, and all we can do is just keep on keeping on. The key thing is not to fool yourself about anything. Understand that you're weak. Understand that a soup kitchen is not the same thing as organizing a factory. Understand that the right, however powerful it seems, still has very, very feeble support for itself.
Yes.
And do not be intimidated by identity politics, because right now that is what the establishment is using to beat down on the left. And you're going to have to find a way of not being intimidated by it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think that, there's a lot of like, I totally agree that like we're way better off than we were 10 years ago. I was, still just learning about these things at that point. But, I think one thing, like a hurdle that's sort of in front of us is I think a lot of people who are socialists are sort of social progressives first and socialists second. And hopefully that can start to change.
No, that's not going to change, because you're talking about, David, you're talking about segments of the middle class. The best you can hope for from the class as a whole is that it not be vicious, that it not be completely hateful towards working people. And right now, liberalism is collapsing. It is collapsing into an open denigration of the very liberties and the very rights that liberalism was associated with for a long time. And that's because what civilized liberalism was the working class movement.
Mm.
And if you look at 19th century liberalism, it was openly contemptuous towards working people. That's what we're sliding into again. All you can hope for is a section of that liberalism is going to be the kind of troubadours for working people within its class. But the actual battering ram against the social order is going to have to come from the class itself, from labor. There are parts of the middle class that will commit class suicide and go organize them. But you can't expect that of more than just a few people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, there's so much I really want to get to. I don't think we're going to be able to, but like, could you talk just a little bit about like the party and the class? Because this is something I think a lot of Americans sort of have a hard time conceptualizing, right? Because it's just not something that they experience in politics. When people hear party, they think like the Democratic or the Republican Party, which aren't parties, I think, in the more like Marxist political theory sense, right?
Nobody thinks they're parties. Like literally nobody. Even mainstream political scientists don't think they're parties.
But I mean, if you could, because basically, like what you see happen a lot is like there's all this kind of hesitation about the party question. Like there's hesitation that I have in the sense of like you can't just sit in a room, even if you have like 10 people who are the most like blue-blooded working class people, 10 people in a room say we are the workers' party, and that's going to be the party, right? That we need something more rooted than that. But you also see, people basically they get worked up about the way elections are set up in this country. But could you talk like just more generally about like why the party is such an important organ for politics, for class politics in particular? Because I think a lot of people, like the only thing that they hear when they hear the word party is like, we're going to have, the SP, Socialist Party, by somebody's name when they run for office. And we're talking about something a little bit different than that.
You can step back a second to derive the answer to this and say, okay, what is how do working people year after year, decade after decade, fight for their interests in a situation where you have a huge geographical spread across thousands of miles, across thousands of establishments? You can't have what's called a movement if everybody's just doing their own thing. Obviously, because capital is centralized, the state is centralized, and if your movement is just thousands of people doing their own thing, not talking to each other, the centralized forces of the ruling class are going to defeat you every time, not just through guns, but just through outmaneuvering you, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to have some, let's not call it a party, call it whatever you want, some centralized entity that is coordinating all these various efforts of working people. All right, well, maybe it'll be an NGO. Maybe it'll be a nonprofit. The problem with that is this: how do these organizations like nonprofits and NGOs, how do they reproduce themselves over time? Well, a party does it through membership dues, through fees, and through energizing its base. So it comes and does volunteer work, unpaid work for the organizing, right? Okay, that forces a party to be accountable. Mm-hmm. It forces it to also be democratic, because if you're not going to be open and vibrant, people are going to lose interest after a while, because they're going to see I'm coming to meetings and my opinions, my interests don't mean anything. Those parties fail. Eventually, if a party is going to succeed, it's going to have to discover democracy, right? And that's what all the parties, the Second International did. They were quite democratic parties, including the Bolsheviks up until 1918. Now, if your model is like an NGO model or nonprofit model, here's the problem. Those are essentially bureaucratic entities, most of whose funds come from outside donors. And those donors are overwhelmingly from the wealthy and from the corporate class.
Mm-hmm.
And those are run by professionals whose main interest is in keeping their position, not in building a movement. So they're not accountable to anyone. Sooner or later, you may choose not to call it a party, but it's going to have to be a party, because you need something that coordinates actions, something that is ideologically coherent, and something that's accountable to its membership. Once you have that, the fourth key component can be had, which is you need somebody, some entity that learns the lessons of what's working and what's not working, understands that, okay, here's how we now at the next stage avoid the mistakes of the past, because it has an interest in actually succeeding. These other entities like nonprofits have an interest only in getting their funding renewed and getting their jobs secured. So if you want your class to actually fight against capital for its rights, it's going to have to be coordinated, it's going to have an ideological vision, and it's going to have to learn the lessons of what works and what doesn't work. Well, you can call it a cheese sandwich if you want, but that's a party.
Yeah.
And until you have that, you're not going to get very far.
Well, Vivek, I mean, really appreciate you spending some time and talking about this with us. Maybe we can do it again sometime in the future, folks. Be sure to subscribe to Catalyst if you aren't already. Catalyst is a really, really important journal, and read Vivek's books. There are links below for people to check that out. And again, really appreciate it, friend.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Thanks, Vivek.
Well, folks, we are going to go to the post game in just 1 second. We're going to be joined by Matt Huber, who will be taking some questions and calls with us. We're also going to be talking about this bizarre attack on him in historical materialism, and hopefully talking a little bit about degrowth. Also, I'm going to have to do it just because I'm not going to have the opportunity to do it later. We're going to talk a little bit about Rick Perry, his governor, who might be running for president.
David's got he's been begging the editors, like, please find room for this. So we got to
please find room. We're going to slot it in right there. You get
column
access
inches
at patreon.com/leftreckoning. If you're going to join us in the post game, you can leave us a voicemail at 1940-289-7234. Get those in again. Try to keep those around a minute or so. And we'll be over there in about 10 minutes or so. It was an honor to have Vivek on. I really can't suggest people, read the stuff, read the books, read Catalyst.
And, you can
listen to a lot of great podcast interviews, and the stuff they put on Jackman with him is really great as well.
Yeah, his books, the two, one, Confronting Capitalism and Class Matrix, useful for folks fluent in left politics, as I think very concise navigation through like different debates and things like that, but also very useful for somebody Bhaskar's book like this too, for people who are new to this.
Yes.
And that's something I'd like to talk to Vivek about too, is like keeping things accessible, especially because I think like David and I I think there's a pressure in left media to be like there's nothing new to me. I understand all of this and I interpret it immediately. Like I guess that.
But it's also it's just like, I know, but it's like, it's also just not true, man. I mean, like,
of course,
like,
yeah.
No, I mean, but like, even like our going back and reading texts we've read before, it's like, oh wow, I missed all of this the first time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And keeping it and so kind of I like folks who are able to continually speak to the people who really need to be persuaded, not like the people who need exactly like the kind of what bespoke type of leftism they are, but like the people who are just like, okay, I'm upset, I thought I believe the Union Joe shit, I believed this or that, and it's not turning out that way. I think those books are very useful.
Mm-hmm. No, for real. Class Matrix especially is really good for that. But folks, we're going to be in the post game about 10 minutes. So patreon.com/leftreckoning to get access to that. I'll be back this Thursday with a Griscom stream, I think around 3 Central, with some really wonderful people from Chicago. We're going to talk about what happened there, because it's very exciting and interesting to learn how they were successful in the mayoral race in Chicago. But yeah, join us in the post game, y'all. Don't skip out on this one. See you soon.
Peace.